Welcome back. Today's topic 1.2 is how to round significant figures. So yesterday we worked on using the Atlantic Pacific rule to count significant figures. Today we're going to work on how do you round them off. So you have a table set up similar to this, and so there's kind of three columns to it. The first one is the problem, and it's asking us to round it to a certain number of significant figures. So the first thing you want to do is count how many are in the value to start, and that will help you with the rounding off for it. So again, don't forget your Atlantic Pacific rule, and a good idea would maybe be to pause this and fill out your middle column now, and check your answers as you go to see if you are counting significant figures correctly. Remember, decimal is present, so this means it's the Pacific rule. So you start from the left at your first non-zero. So this value has 3 significant figures in it. It wants us to round off at 1. So you always start with your leading value. So we start at the 2. So it only wants 1 significant figure, so the 2 is all that we can keep. The thing you have to look at is the value that comes after it in terms of rounding. A 0 is not going to round up the 2. So 2.03 rounded to 1 significant figure is going to just be 2. So that's what we're working on today, is counting number of significant figures and then rounding it appropriately. In the next example, we have 0.004174 to 2 significant figures. It has a decimal present, but remember you start at your first non-zero. Your first non-zero is the 4. So as you make your way left to right, in total, this has 4 total significant figures. We're going to round this to 2. You start at the first significant. So these zeros are what we call placeholders. They're keeping these non-zero values in the correct place. So we start rounding where we have significant figures at. So the 4 and the 1 is what we can keep. What you look at is what comes after it. That 7, using our rounding rules, is going to round that up. These zeros you're going to keep because they are not significant, and that keeps things in the correct place value. So we're going to have an answer of 0.0042. We've worked on scientific notation. You could also say 4.2 times 10 to the negative third if you'd rather use scientific notation. In the next example, we have 3,918. It wants 1 significant figure in the final answer. There's no decimal, so this is the Atlantic rule. So you go from right to left at your first non-zero. So in total, this value has 4 significant figures. It only wants 1. No matter if you're using the Atlantic or Pacific rule, you always start at your first non-zero digit, which is the 3. That is the only significant figure that we can keep. We look at what comes after it. There's a 9. So we're going to round that up from a 3 to a 4. However, we have this 9, 1, and 8 to deal with. There's a huge difference. Let's say this is your paycheck, and let's say your paycheck was supposed to be $3,918. Well, if let's say your employer pays you with significant figures, there's a huge difference between $3,918 and $4. And so what we do with these values that we need to get rid of is we change them to zeros. Again, we call these placeholders. So I have one too many zero. Let's see here. Get my eraser. Maybe. There we go. So there we go. That zero's gone. So again, those are called placeholders. And again, you can do the Atlantic Pacific rule to it. This has no decimal. So you would start from right going left, and this would only have 1 sig fig. So you can check your work, so to speak. In the next example, we have 0.25958 to 2 sig figs. It's Pacific, so in total, this value has 5 sig figs. We need to round off to 2. Again, that 0 isn't considered significant, so that's not going to impact that answer. So we have 0.25. The following value is a 9. So this is rounded to 0.26. In our next one, we have 0.0022121 to 3 sig figs. It's a Pacific again because we have a decimal. So we start at that 2, make our way to the right, and so this one is going to have a total of 5 significant figures. We want to round it off at 3. So again, you start at your first significant digit, so the 2, 2, and 1, that can all stay. Again, those zeros are not counted as significant, but we will keep them for placeholders. So what we look at is 2, 2, 1. What comes next? This 2 outside isn't going to round. And this is our final answer to 3 sig figs. Again, you can always check and look your work over. If you did the Pacific rule, there would only be 3 sig figs now. This next example, we want 1 significant figure in the final answer. To start out, we're going to use the Pacific rule. As we go to the right, this has a total of 6 significant figures. This is the first value we can keep, and we look at what comes after it. So this becomes 0.5. We can't put zeros after that. You can't put a 0 after that because, again, you will have another significant figure by doing that. So zeros start to become an important thing to keep track of in chemistry and physics and the physical science side of science. As we look at this next one, it's another Pacific rule because a decimal's present, and it only wants 1 sig fig. To start, we start at the 3 and make our way to the right. Again, this one's going to also have 6 significant figures like the previous example. It also just wants 1 significant figure, so we can start here at the 3, and we look at what comes next. That 6 is going to round up, and so we have 0.004. You could also put this in scientific notation. You could say 4 times 10 to the negative third. Again, either answer is appropriate here. We have another Pacific example, but now something greater than 0, and so we have or actually something greater than 1, I should say. So we have 6.353341 to 3 sig figs. We're going to start at that 6 and go all the way to the right using that Pacific rule. This is 7 sig figs. Again, we can keep 3. So what I'm boxing in are the 3 that we can keep. And we have to look at what comes after it. That 3 isn't going to round, so this answer rounded off to 3 significant figures is going to be 6.35. The last 2 have something a little bit different going on with them. So to start out, this is an Atlantic rule because there's no decimal. So we're going to start at the 3, go all the way to the right, and this is a total of 6 significant figures. It's asking for 3 in the final answer. So again, you always start from the left at your greatest placeholder, so the 7. So the 7, 0, and 6 are what we can keep. Looking what comes after it, there's a 7 there, so that's going to round up. So we get 707. Again, we have these digits that were not carried through. What you do again is you substitute them with zeros to keep those placeholders. So those 4 digits left outside, you swap those to zeros, and I can add my commas in here to fill out my digit. Again, you could do 7.07 times 10, and again, if you moved your decimal, that would be to the 6th power. The very last example, same thing. In this case, it's a Pacific rule because there's a decimal. Start at the 5, go all the way to the right. This has a grand total of 8 significant figures. It wants us to round off at 2, so you keep your 2 largest place values, so that's the 5 and the 4. What comes next is an 8. So that 8 is going to round, so that becomes 5, 5. And just like the previous example, we're going to change these out to zeros. Now, in this particular example, we have this decimal. We cannot put the decimal here, and I'm going to show why. If I swap that over, that keeps it Pacific. So I would start from left and go to the right. That would keep 8 significant figures. So the decimal part of this example is going to get washed away. So again, we have to keep those important place values here to the left of the decimal, but what is to the right needs to disappear. So again, we don't have significant figures in that. So it just rounds off to 55,000. So your homework is basically going to be the same idea. You're going to have a table much like this where you're going to have a value, you're going to count sig figs and then round it. If you were unsure on any of the examples in the notes or have questions on your homework, please reach out to me.